What's going on, guys? Welcome back. In this video, we're going to be going over 15 glute medius strengthening exercises. Make sure to go look at the last video where we talked about glute medius kinematics and we applied it to a real client in real time. We also went over open versus closed kinetic chain strengthening of the glute medius and why it's important to incorporate both. So let's dive into those a little bit more. So to talk about our closed kinetic chain strengthening exercises, like we talked about before, it's all about our connection to the floor. So our first one is going to be a single leg stance with a banded abduction. So this band is pulling us inward that way, so we're forced to use that glute medius to pull us outward. So we're just going to be in the stance like we talked about before. We're in that tripod position and we're just going to load in that glute. So you want to think about sitting those hips back just a little bit slightly, and then we keep that tripod position and we don't let that band pull us in. We use those glutes to pull us into that abduction. Hold this position for as long as you can and then kind of work up towards that. You can even add progressions where maybe you go into pretty much a single leg RDL and then to a hip flexor pull through RDL while you just maintain that single leg stance in that tripod. Number 2 is hip dips. For this exercise, you're going to have one leg on a box, the other one's just going to be hovering off. All we're really thinking about is our standing leg that's on the box. So what we're thinking about doing is we're almost bringing our hips to stretch that side glute back and across. So we're shooting our hips back that direction to then engage and squeeze and come up over it. That's why they're called hip dips, because you want to think about dropping down and squeezing and come up over it. This one's a little bit of a tricky one. You really have to get the technique down. So really just looking for the biggest possible stretch you can inside that hip socket to then squeeze and engage, come up over it. Number 3 is lateral walks. So like we talked about in our last video, you want to make sure when you take that step and plant that, you're externally rotating through that side glute while we maintain that tripod position, while we keep that and join that leg. Make sure when you go there, you're not coming and losing that rotation, because that's that glute medius not staying engaged. So take that step, drive through, lateral walks. Number 4 is wall clams. I love these because it really takes out that TFL and puts that hip into extension. So you're gonna have that foot externally rotated in that tripod position. You're gonna reach back onto that wall. You wanna make sure this hip is into extension. You don't wanna be close like this. You want that hip back and behind. And all we're doing is we're squeezing through that glute med and just rotating that foot on the wall as we keep this foot nice and stable, and we're just rotating externally. And you almost want to think about too, when you're doing this, you're almost going up and back. I'm not just opening to the side, I'm almost trying to reach back and across when you go out that way. Number 6 is a cable abduction kickback. You can also do these with a band. There's a lot of different ways you can do this. The way I like to really do it is crossing that leg forward, so it takes out that TFL, because a lot of people will just be forward with that TFL. So I like to cross it forward so we have that hip into extension. And I like to really kind of lean into it so we are already starting with that glute med stretch. Again, we're not letting our back do most of the motion. It's all within that side glute. So really focus on that mind muscle connection of really squeezing through there to come up and back. And again, I'm kind of thinking about too with my foot, keeping my foot pointed downwards. I don't want to externally rotate, because that's how we're going to hit way more of that TFL. So keep that foot pointed downwards as we just squeeze that side glute. Number 6 is lateral sleds. I really like this one because it gets us into that lateral plane. You can either bring that back leg as it crosses over, or you can have it come in front of you when you're walking. So for our last closed kinetic chain strengthening exercises, there's going to be all of our single leg movements. Like we talked about before, the importance of that glute med is to support us in that single leg stance. Number 7 is a Bulgarian split squat. I like to have one dumbbell if we're really focusing on that side glute, because it kind of creates a contralateral force, so it forces more work on that lateral chain. Put that back leg onto that back box. Again, we're practicing that elbows position, so really externally rotate so we have that side glute loaded, that tripod engaged, and then we're just sitting those hips back while we maintain that position, we maintain that tripod the whole time while we just squeeze through that glute max, hamstrings, quads, all that, but we have to keep that side glute loaded the entire time during this exercise. Number 8 is reverse lunges. So all we're thinking about, again, with all these single leg movements is that tripod position within our foot, and then we're just going into that reverse lunge. The whole time we maintain that kinetic energy in our foot within that glute medius, and we don't let that arch fall and just go straight back like this. We have to make sure when we're back here, we have that side glute loaded, and we're just keeping that the whole time and squeezing through that glute and that quad. Number 9 is lateral step ups. So we're just literally thinking about just step it up straight to the side. How we do this is we really keep that side glute loaded. We keep that knee out when we have that glute loaded. We don't want to let that knee just come in as we step up. So get that glute loaded, then we step up, bring that leg up. Same thing when we come back down. You want to make sure when you're coming back down, your knee isn't just kind of coming in like this, and we're not really thinking about that, because that's our true eccentric strength of that glute medius as it stretches. So keep that glute loaded, drive it up, keep that knee out as you come back down. And you can kind of think about sitting back into those hips too when you come back down. Number 10 is a landmine curtsey lunge. So you're going to think about grabbing the landmine here up to our chest, almost like if we were to be in a front squat position. And then we're reaching our hips back and across into that curtsey to then drive off of that side glute and come up with it. You can even add a little hip flexor to work with it too, but you're reaching back and across as far back as you can reach, to really stretch that glute to then come up with it. If it's too difficult to do with a landmine, you can also do this with dumbbells, like a regular curtsey lunge. And then we're reaching our hips back and across into that curtsey. Now for our open kinetic chain strengthening exercises, this is any time we are not in contact with the ground. All right, so number 11, this is our clam exercise. This is an old school PT exercise where you want to think about kind of keeping your hips rolled forward. We're in a side plank position. All we're doing is we're opening our hips up by squeezing through that glute medius. As a progression, you can add it with a band here, but you want to just make sure your hips are really rolled forward. We're not letting our hips come back every single time we open up. So keep those hips forward, open just up with that band. Next progression would also be coming up into a plank with it. So in a side plank, then you can go into that abduction with there as you keep your heels together. Another one you can do is an elevated clam where you sit your hips back, then you open up with it. Sit your hips back, then you open up with it. So those are 4 different progressions that you can add to those clams. Number 12 is also an old school physical therapy exercise. It's a sidelying abduction, but it's often done wrong. So what you want to think about when it comes to form here is you want to think about almost pointing that toe a little bit downwards, and then what we're doing is we're going back and across. You don't want to just go straight up to the ceiling. You want to go back and across with that hip and make sure that side glute is doing everything. Another problem here too is a lot of people like to use that QL muscle that helps within the back here, and they'll just use their back with motion, but it's all should be with that glute. So traction that pelvis down and make sure you don't feel that hand pop into there, and just sit your hips back and across or squeeze your glute up that way. Number 13 is a side plank abduction. So you're going to be in a side plank position. You want to think about your hips coming all the way forward into hip thrust. This should be flat as a board. And we have this leg, and we're just going same thing like we did in the other ones, back and across, back and across. So this one is very similar to the last one, but this one we have our hips into extension. We have those glute max loaded. On the one here on the ground, we don't have that glute max loaded. So it's a little bit different, but it's a different variation. Number 14 is a star plank abduction. So we're gonna have our legs straight, our body is as straight as it possibly can be. We're gonna come up into a side plank, and then all we're doing is we're bringing our leg up. So we're working the both up glute med and that bottom glute med because it's having to hold our body upwards. So with this, you also want to make sure that your foot isn't forward. We want to have our leg backwards. This is nice and straight, and we're not in this kind of position. So here, nice and straight. Number 15 is the abduction machine. There's a lot of different ways to do this. So one variation is just the normal way, just coming into here, making sure you're not getting those TFLs to kick on first. So really think about that mind-muscle connection, all from those glutes first. You can also change the angle of your body, so sitting a little bit more upright, but always making sure you have that glute medius mind-muscle connection. Another one, you can really lean it forward. Same thing, really make sure you have that glute connection. Then one of my favorite ones is getting out of hip flexion. You know, a lot of our exercises were in hip flexion, so get into hip extension, then squeeze through those side glutes. The whole time you're getting that glute max pulling you up into extension, and you're squeezing through those side glutes. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment if there's anything specific you guys want to see. I'll see you on the next one.